Spectrums, A Brief History of Modern India, Chapter 2, Advent of Europeans in India. Though we talk of ancient, medieval, and modern periods in history, history is a continuity. It is not always easy to distinguish clearly when one period ends and another begins. So, if we think of history of modern India as beginning with the advent of Europeans, we need to go back to what is generally considered the medieval period, that is, the 15th century itself, indeed to a time before the Mughals came and established their empire. The Portuguese in India, the quest for and the discovery of sea route to India. After the decline of Roman Empire in the 7th century, the Arabs had established their domination in Egypt and Persia. Direct contact between Europeans and India declined, and with that, the easy accessibility to the Indian commodities like spices, calicos, silk, and various precious stones that were greatly in demand was affected. In 1453, Constantinople fell to Ottoman Turks, who were on the ascendant. Merchandise from India went to European markets through Arab Muslim intermediaries. The Red Sea trade route was a state monopoly from which Islamic rulers earned tremendous revenues. The land routes to India were also controlled by the Arabs. In the circumstances, the Europeans were keen to find a direct sea route to India. 15th century Europe was gripped by the spirit of Renaissance with its call for exploration. At the same time, Europe made great advances in the art of shipbuilding and navigation. Hence, there was an eagerness all over Europe for adventurous sea voyages to reach the unknown corners of the East. The economic development of many regions of Europe was also progressing rapidly with the expansion of land under cultivation. The introduction of an improved plough, scientific crop management, such as crop rotation, and increased supply of meat, which called for spices for cooking as well as preservation. Prosperity also grew, and with it, the demand for oriental luxury goods also increased. Venice and Genoa, which had earlier prospered through trade in oriental goods, were too small to take on the mighty Ottoman Turks or to take up major exploration on their own. The North Europeans were ready to aid Portugal and Spain with money and men, even as the Genoese were ready to provide ships and technical knowledge. It is also to be noted that Portugal had assumed the leadership in Christendom's resistance to Islam, even as it had taken on itself the spirit of exploration that had characterized the Genoese. Historians have observed that the idea of finding an ocean route to India had become an obsession for Prince Henry of Portugal, who was nicknamed the Navigator. Also, he was keen to find a way to circumvent the Muslim domination of the Eastern Mediterranean and all the routes that connected India to Europe. Pope Nicholas V gave Henry a bull in 1454. Conferring on him the right to navigate sea to distant shores of the Orient, more specifically as far as India, in an attempt to fight Islamic influence and spread Christian faith. However, Prince Henry died before his dream became a reality. Then, in 1497, under the Treaty of Tordesillas, the rulers of Portugal and Spain divided the known Christian world between them by an imaginary line in the Atlantic, some 1300 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Under the treaty, Portugal could claim and occupy everything to the east of the line, while Spain could claim everything to the west. The situation was thus prepared for the Portuguese incursions into the waters around India. It was in 1487 that the Portuguese navigator Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope in Africa and sailed up the eastern coast. He was well convinced that the long sought after sea route to India had been found. But It was only 10 years later that an expedition of Portuguese ships headed out to India in 1497 and arrived in India in slightly less than 11 months' time in May 1498. From trading to ruling, Vasco da Gama. The arrival of three ships under Vasco da Gama, led by a Gujarati pilot named Abdul Majid, at Calicut in May 1498, profoundly affected the course of Indian history. The Hindu ruler of Calicut, the Zamorin or Samudri, however, had no apprehensions as to Europeans' intentions. As the prosperity of his kingdom was due to Calicut's position as an entrepot, he accorded a friendly reception to Vasco da Gama. The Arab traders who had a good business on the Malabar coast were apprehensive and were not keen on Portuguese getting a hold there. For centuries, the trading system in Indian Ocean had had numerous participants: Indians, Arabs, Africans from the East Coast, Chinese, Javanese, among others. But these participants had acted according to some tacit rules of conduct, and none had sought overwhelming dominance, though all were in it for profit. The Portuguese changed that they wanted to monopolize hugely profitable Eastern trade by excluding competitors, especially the Arabs. Vasco da Gama stayed in India for 3 months. When he returned to Portugal, he carried back with him a rich cargo and sold the merchandise in European market at a huge profit. The importance of direct access to pepper trade was made clear by the fact that elsewhere the Europeans who had to buy through Muslim middlemen would have had to spend 10 times as much for the same amount of pepper. Not surprisingly, other profit-seeking merchants of European nations were tempted to come to India and directly trade. A voyage was undertaken by Pedro Alvarez Cabral to trade for spices, negotiating and establishing a factory at Calicut, where he arrived in September 1500. There was an incident of conflict when the Portuguese factory at Calicut was attacked by the locals, resulting in the death of several Portuguese. In retaliation, Cabral seized a number of Arab merchant ships anchored in harbour and killed hundreds of their crew, besides confiscating their cargo and burning the ships. Calicut was bombarded by Cabral. Later, Cabral succeeded in making advantageous treaties with the local rulers of Cochin and Kannanur. Vasco da Gama once again came to India in 1501. The Zamorin declined to exclude the Arab merchants in favor of the Portuguese when Vasco da Gama combined commercial greed with the ferocious hostility and wreaked vengeance on Arab shipping wherever he could. His rupture with the Zamorin thus became total and complete. Vasco da Gama set up a trading factory at Kannanur. Gradually, Calicut, Kannanur and Cochin became the important trade centers of Portuguese. Gradually, under the pretext of protecting the factories and their trading activities, the Portuguese got permission to fortify these centers. View: the landing of Vasco da Gama at Calicut in 1498 is generally regarded as the beginning of a new era in world history, especially in the relationship between Asia and Europe. Although Asia and Europe had been in commercial relations with each other since antiquity, the opening of the direct sea relations between the two was not only the fulfillment of an old dream, it presaged a big increase of trade between the two. This, however, was only one of the objectives of the Portuguese. For the Portuguese, the opening of a new sea route to India would give a big blow to the Muslims, the Arabs, and the Turks, who were the traditional enemies of Christianity and were posing a new threat to Europe by virtue of growing military and naval power of the Turks. A direct sea link with India would displace the virtual monopoly of the Arabs and Turks over the trade in Eastern goods, especially spices. They also vaguely hoped by their exploration of Africa they would be able to link up with the kingdom of legendary Prior John and be in a position to attack the Muslims from two sides. Thus, the commercial and religious objectives supported and justified each other. By Satish Chandra. Francisco de Almeida. In 1505, the King of Portugal appointed a governor in India for a 3-year term and equipped the incumbent with the sufficient force to protect the Portuguese interests. Francisco de Almeida, the newly appointed governor, was asked to consolidate the position of Portuguese in India and to destroy Muslim trade by seizing Aden, Ormuz, and Malacca. He was also advised to build fortresses at Anjadiva, Cochin, Kannanur, and Kilwa. What Almeida, however, encountered along with the opposition of Zamarin was a threat from the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. Encouraged by the merchants of Venice, whose lucrative commerce was now at risk due to the Portuguese interference, the Egyptians raised a fleet in the Red Sea to stop the advances of the Portuguese. In 1507, the Portuguese squadron was defeated in a naval battle off Diu by the combined Egyptian and Gujarat navies, and Almeida's son was killed. Next year, Almeida avenged his defeat by totally crushing the two navies. Almeida's vision was to make the Portuguese the master of Indian Ocean. His policy was known as the Blue Water Policy. View: as long as you may be powerful at sea, you will hold India as yours. And if you do not possess this power, little will avail you a fortress on shore. By Francisco de Almeida. Alfonso de Albuquerque. Albuquerque, who succeeded Almeida as the Portuguese governor in India, was the real founder of the Portuguese power in the East, a task he completed before his death. He secured for Portugal the strategic control of Indian Ocean by establishing bases overlooking all the entrances to the sea. There was Portuguese strongholds in East Africa, off the Red Sea at Ormuz, in Malabar, and at Malacca. The Portuguese under Albuquerque bolstered their stranglehold by introducing a permit system for other ships and exercising control over the major shipbuilding centers in the region. The known availability of timber in the Gulf and Red Sea regions for shipbuilding also helped the Portuguese in their objectives. Albuquerque acquired Goa from Sultan of Bijapur in 1510 with ease. The principal port of the Sultan of Bijapur became the first bit of Indian territory to be under European since the time of Alexander the Great. An interesting feature of his rule was the abolition of sati. The Portuguese men who had come on the voyages and stayed back in India were from Albuquerque's day, encouraged to take local wives. In Goa and province of the north, they established themselves as village landlords, often building new roads and irrigation works, introducing new crops like tobacco and cashew nut or better plantation varieties of coconut, besides planting large groves of coconut to meet the need for coir rigging and cordage. In the cities such as Goa and Cochin, they settled as artisans and master craftsmen besides being traders. Most of such Portuguese came to look upon their new settlements rather than Portugal as home. View: bitter persecution of Muslims was one serious drawback of Albuquerque's policy. This could have been due to his resolve to further the interest of his countrymen by complete extinction of Muslim commercial interest in the East. During his rule, Albuquerque did his best to strengthen the fortifications of Goa and enhance its commercial importance. In order to secure a permanent Portuguese population in India, he encouraged his men to take Indian wives. The Gazetteer of India, Volume 2. Nino da Cunha. Nino da Cunha assumed office of governor of Portuguese interest in India in November 1529 and almost 1 year later shifted the headquarters of Portuguese government in India from Cochin to Goa. Bahadur Shah of Gujarat, during his conflict with the Mughal Emperor Humayun, secured help from the Portuguese by ceding to them in 1534 the island of Bassein with its dependencies and revenues. He also promised them a base in Diu. However, Bahadur Shah's relations with Portuguese became sour when Humayun withdrew from Gujarat in 1536. Since the inhabitants of the town started fighting with the Portuguese, Bahadur Shah wanted to raise a wall of partition. Opposing this, the Portuguese started negotiations, in course of which the ruler of Gujarat was invited to a Portuguese ship and killed. The Kunha also attempted to increase Portuguese influence in Bengal by settling many Portuguese nationals there with Hooghly as their headquarters.